Good morning, everybody. This is Andrea Seidel from Advocates for DeKalb Animals, and I have with me today Commissioner Lorraine Cochran Johnson, who is a candidate for CEO of DeKalb County and almost an advocate herself, but she doesn't have a red shirt yet. So, just as a reminder for those who are not 100% familiar, Advocates for DeKalb Animals is a grassroots, nonprofit, citizen-based organization focused on addressing our animal crisis in DeKalb County. We have asked CEO candidates to review the data that we've developed and tell us what they are going to do to meet the massive challenges that we have with pets and their people and the community in general around animal welfare. We know that DeKalb voters care about animal welfare, even if it is not the top topic at every meeting, but we know that they care. And so today we're speaking with Commissioner Lorraine Cochran Johnson to hear more about how she plans to address the animal crisis when she becomes CEO. So thank you again for joining us, Commissioner Cochran Johnson.
Well, Andrea, thank you for having me. Also, to everyone on this call, I know that, you all are each animal advocates. And honestly, you're a working example of how important it is to engage in advocacy because the issues that were raised, although I was aware of the overcrowding, it had been presented through a report, an independent report, an audit report that was done. You all brought a different level of consciousness to the issues that were taking place because many people that may be on this call, you actually volunteer, you're present. So you have provided me with valuable information to better help me help you and to understand exactly what's happening right now as it relates to our animals, both animals that are held as evidence as well as animals that are held in facility. I would like to begin by saying that, of course, many of you are aware that through your advocacy, DeKalb County made an appropriation or set aside, I should say, through our recently passed SPLOST, our 2023 SPLOST, for I believe 7.5 million was set aside to be utilized towards expanding and or remediating the negative conditions we see. In all honesty, I'm not sure if that's going to be adequate. However, it is what has been set aside. Now, one of the things that, we're all keenly aware of is that we're dealing with a matter that is urgent. I, too, am the mother of two fur babies. I have a cat and I also have a dog. And some of the conditions that surround the animals are so deplorable that it is concerning from even for a human being, quality of life, due to the horrendous environment that they're faced with. And also, I would say from a public responsibility standpoint, it was actually through your advocacy that I realized that the cost to house an individual or incarcerated individual in the DeKalb County Jail is not far from the cost that's associated with housing animals on a daily basis. So we've got to remediate the condition. I would say that, I look forward to becoming your next CEO. And once I am, what I would like to do is create a board specifically that's associated with making the decisions and serving as the springboard and wise counsel to the organization that will receive the RFP that is associated with the remediation of the conditions we see. Now, I also, out of an abundance of caution, and fearing that even sometimes, because many of you may not know, but I have managed newspapers for over 20 years. I come from a writing background. And for writers, it's often very difficult for us to catch our own mistakes. And I had began to feel, as I heard from the animal advocates, and of course brought in individuals within Lifeline from the executive leadership on down, that there may be a detachment between what people see and experience and what leadership believed may be the actual case. So, as a result of that, I wrote a resolution several months ago, probably 6 months or so ago, that requested a mandatory external audit, because prior to that time, we have relied upon those individuals within Frontline to explain to us the conditions and to tell us what was necessary to remediate them. But I do believe, and I will ensure, that an external audit takes place, and it is that audit that is used as the basis for the actions we take. That audit will not, of course, or won't only cover how animals are actually received and processed, but also all of the internal workings within the organization to ensure that we remain a no kill shelter, that we are maximizing our benefit in the community, and that we remediate the conditions. Now, one other thing that I'd like to say, because at the animal shelter, to an extent, we do provide certain free services. However, being a pet lover, I would also like to explore operating a 100% free clinic for animals. And I say this because recently I had an incident with my beloved Chico, and went over to Village Vets, and it was at a price tag of around $1,600. And the average individual cannot afford animal care. And I do not want there to be encumbrances to providing, um, for, shall I say, the adoptions as well as for the long term care of animals. So I firmly believe that if we are able to progressively move pets along to homes, it could be that I believe the county should bear the responsibility of operating a free clinic where animal owners, pet owners are assured that they can bring in their pets. Now, I'm not committing to that because I think that's going to require research to determine what the cost would be. But when I look at the current cost for housing, I do believe that there are possibilities there. Another thing that I committed to pretty early on, because for those of you that are with us, I want to explain how SPLOST works. Last year in 2023, when we passed our SPLOST, and the taxpayers passed it through referendum, the SPLOST collection actually begins this year. So January 1st, 2024, we began collecting dollars for the second 6-year SPLOST. And of course, with SPLOST, it is a 6-year cycle. So technically, even when the commitment was made for the 7.5 million, if we allow SPLOST to run its course, I'm just going to sit here so that it will carry us from 24. So that would be approximately 2028 before we would have the 7.5 million in hand. But I did commit, and I do believe that it's decent and in order that we would move forward with an immediate study to determine the proper course of action to remediate the conditions and ensure that we're prepared for the future. But I would float a bond against the expected revenue because that is not unusual. In government, once we have a dedicated funding source, we can very easily use that projected income based upon that dedicated source that we know to be reliable to move forward with floating a bond against the revenue. And of course, we would pay back the monies over time as they come in, but it doesn't prevent us from moving forward, because I had a real fear that because of how I've seen things happen in DeKalb and with SPLOST, that there may be multiple years wait before any action was taken. And this is an issue that can't wait any longer.
So
Um,
Commissioner, if I may, you have already begun to answer some of our questions, and
oh, okay.
that's fine. That's fine. I mean, I could have just let you go, but I do want to give
Please
the audience
stop
the
me. Please
opportunity.
stop me. I'd
No,
much
no,
rather be
there's nothing you
responsive.
there's nothing you said that isn't music to an advocate's ear, especially your sense of urgency. So let's start with the first topic, which is on breeding. DeKalb County has a significant problem with breeding more dogs than can be absorbed into DeKalb's homes. Many are bred for sale, and thousands of these dogs end up homeless, roaming streets and neighborhoods, and about 5,000 of them end up in our shelter every year. 42% of those dogs are puppies under the age of a year. And in many cruelty, neglect, and abandonment cases that we follow, unregulated breeding activity is an underlying and contributing factor. Overbreeding is the biggest issue for advocates. Not only are we concerned about the suffering the animals endure, but it is very expensive to the county as well and its citizens. So as CEO, what are you going to do to address this and lead the county out of this problem? And will you support and enforce regulation of breeding?
Absolutely. I think the only thing that we can do here that's reasonable is enforce regulations around breeding. Because unfortunately, what we find at this point is that many of the backyard breeders that are pet breeders, they do not obtain a license from the state in order to sell the pets that they produce. Um, so they are unlicensed. In many instances, these are individuals who honestly lack the cure for animals. It is strictly for monetary gain. So I'm very happy to say that I joined with Commissioner Long Spears because she has also been a friend of the fur babies. And we wrote a backyard breeding ordinance that would institute best practices for breeders. First and foremost, ensuring that they are licensed, because that's absolutely necessary. Um, that they have a license to breed, and also that they have a business license to operate. Because that, as far as we're concerned, is literally the front line of ensuring better and more optimal outcomes so that we don't have puppy mills where puppies are not adequately cared for and ultimately, in some cases, end up becoming a part of the lifeline family, where we already suffer from overcrowding.
Thank you. Moving on to our next topic. Historically, animal services has been the last thought of county government, in our perspective, for sure. It's the department with the smallest budget, and some would say the least respect. And it's the topic that many want to ignore and turn away from. In recent years, residents of the county have lifted this issue up for greater attention, but many citizens continue to feel that they have to organize and push for every little step forward. The county has an animal services advisory board of committed citizen volunteers, and advocates for DeKalb animals also has a large group of active citizen volunteers. We all follow county decision-making and programming, as well as promote adoptions and fostering to provide homes for DeKalb's homeless animals. We also attend court to give voice to the suffering of animals that are the victims of cruelty and neglect. From our perspective, we oppose the idea of a new task force to study or study group because it would delay the needed actions that have already been explored and vetted from years of national standards research. And I know you in your preface mentioned establishing a board. So we would hope that you would draw from the advisory board and advocates for DeKalb animals, but I'll ask the question, in your administration, what, if any, role do you anticipate for the volunteers of the Animal Services Advisory Board, which are county appointed, and in advocates for DeKalb animals?
Yes, and let me say to you that, I've been very clear in understanding the depth of knowledge that the advocates for DeKalb animals has brought to the table. Honestly, many of the appearances that you all have made as a collective before the Board of Commissioners, the depth of knowledge, the data, and the information that you brought, honestly, has just been invaluable. So I'm happy to have this conversation because understanding that many of you may be members of the Animal Services Advisory Board, I wanted to hear from you as to whether or not you are comfortable and believe that working alongside those who are chosen to spearhead the efforts to expand and remediate the current conditions would be a task that would fall under your umbrella. I'm certainly not here to reinvent a wheel that's already rolling. And for individuals who have already given so much time and have the depth of knowledge, then we certainly want to pull from you all as members. So that has always been the intent. So whether it's through the Animal Services Advisory Board or whether certain individuals are chosen, I welcome your input because many of those, even when I don't see certain faces here, I recognize names, but I recognize you all as being individuals who have the depth of knowledge to help us get it right this time. Because, the truth of the matter is, this isn't the first time we've had this problem. We remediated the problem and created a new problem because I don't think the initial actions that were taken were sufficient. I don't think it was intentional that they weren't sufficient. But often in government, what I've found is when we take actions and we don't bring the right parties to the table, um, an action may be taken and lots of money spent when that action is taken, but it may prove to be inefficient or ineffective in remediating the situation. So, that said, I've heard you loud and clear. And I would now ask, if I may, Andrea, how many members currently serve on the Animal Services Advisory Board? I know I personally had one appointment, but is it a total of 11 individuals or how many individuals serve?
I believe that there are 9 positions. However, there are some vacancies, mostly in your former district for sure, but also CEO appointees that are vacant. So we certainly need to beef up that board some more. And my guess is that you can, since it is a county board, that you can sculpt that board to be whatever you need it to be as CEO. So I'll leave it in your capable hands with that. And if it's okay, I'll move on to the next topic.
Okay.
Each year, hundreds of DeKalb residents are charged with cruelty, neglect, and abandonment of their animals. Often these crimes are connected to other crimes, some of them violent. And additionally, the connection between animal neglect and cruelty and domestic violence, spousal and child abuse has been well established by public health researchers. Advocates would like to see leadership address these issues with preventive measures. Additionally, the victims of animal cruelty and neglect are impounded by the county into the crowded shelter and are often held there for months and even years, adding more to the punishment to the animal victims on top of the bad treatment that led their owners to be charged in the first place. DeKalb has recently joined many other counties in Georgia in utilizing motions to dispose of the animals prior to trial and petitions for cost of care to release the dogs so that the animals are not sentenced to confinement when their owners are charged. As CEO, will you continue the practice of utilizing state laws such as motions to dispose and cost of care to encourage release of animals? If so, will you develop written procedures for use of automatic implementation of these procedures, or these practices, I should say? And will you also develop an operating policy that encourages the owner's release of the animals before the cases begin?
Yes, and let me say on this issue, there remains a great deal of ambiguity here because when I first in the
So,
statistics on how many animals that Solicitor General, Donna Scribbling Coleman, Donna Coleman Scribbling, and raised the issue of whether or not we could take, shall I say, a different course of action. Well, of course, our county attorney, Vivian Ernst, became engaged because the numbers that I had been presented were a far cry from what I was told existed in terms of animals that were being held as evidence. And to this day, I have been rebutted in the belief that there are more than 60 animals that were being held as evidence. And that was based upon the last count that I was given by both our Solicitor General and our attorney. So, as CEO, I'll have the authority to get to the bottom of where we are because I have been literally told and led to believe that the problem that has been expressed is not a problem at all. I've also been told that Lifeline has the authority at any time after a pet has been processed or held for evidence. I believe, if I remember correctly, because I do not want to ever speak out of turn in terms of what is communicated, but literally I was told that the animals did not have to be held at all after the initial processing. But that has proven not to be the case because there are still animals that remain as evidence that cannot or have not been allowed to return to whether it's a home environment or be adopted. So again, there is ambiguity there from those who are entrusted with documents and information. So it is going to take some work to get to the bottom of honestly how many animals at this moment or at any given time is being held as evidence. But I will say that I am committed to streamlining whatever that process may be so that animals do not become permanently or perpetually held in adverse conditions when they have already often suffered and just simply need to be reintroduced to a new home or a caring owner.
so I'm going to just add a couple of points here of maybe clarity on the information that you've been given. First of all, evidence is evidence until the judge releases the evidence. The shelter has no ability to remove evidence from a case. The shelter was granted the ability to try to find foster homes for animals that are being held as evidence. And I do know that they work actively at that. And my guess is that some of the participants on this call are currently fosters of animals that are still held as live evidence. However, that is a challenge in and of itself. Finding fosters and adoption homes is a general challenge. So to ask someone to take a dog that could be 110, 120 pounds and bring them into their home for over a year, 2 years, while cases still drag on, and don't get me off on that topic, is a lot to ask. So bottom line is they are still incarcerated regardless of where we put them. Regarding the numbers, I
And
don't,
I'm really interested in the numbers and how are you all able, because, in DeKalb, and I don't mean to interject, but often we have had to rely on information from individuals. And, it gives me great pause as to whether or not they have their facts straight. So, it amazes me when you're able to give me information that people charged with the responsibility can't seem to do. So, at this moment, do you have any numbers that you show on the amount of animals that are currently being held as live evidence?
I don't have today's numbers. However, I could pick up my phone and, look them up because they are available in the Pet Point database that the county also has access to. And it is literally an inventory of animals. It's an inventory of animals and whatever stage they are in the shelter or in foster, whether they're court case or pending intake or whatever they are. It's an inventory, and that inventory is reviewed daily at the shelter and updated in Pet Point, so that we can provide you that information any day. We recently have been averaging around 60 plus animals, I will say. However, that 60 animals is down from our previous average of 120 animals, average of 120 animals as live evidence. The reason it's down like that is because advocates and the advisory board have been on the courts daily. We have team members sitting in every single court session as witnesses to these court cases and what happens and how they're handled or mishandled oftentimes. So we believe that we've been putting the pressure on to bring those animals down, and that's a good thing. However, by comparison to other counties, Cobb has 0 counties held as 0 animals, I should say, held as live evidence. Clayton, the last I heard was around 14 animals. Now that's Clayton County. We're not talking about, a particularly upscale area. I believe that Gwinnett reflects that or even lower. So we stand alone in having this issue of high numbers of animals held as court case animals. And so I will also say that you mentioned the audit that you had asked for or authored 6 months ago. We would ask that you include in that audit a comprehensive audit of animal control and code enforcement along with that, because oftentimes the loopholes that are created in these cases are created by insufficient documentation, either by animal control, code enforcement, or the 3 parties connecting together, meaning the enforcement parties and the shelter. So this is not about what I'm saying today. I'm just asking you, are you willing to develop an operating policy that encourages the owner's release of the animals before the cases begin, as is the case in neighboring counties?
Absolutely. And I'd be willing, and I think it should also be that we engage law to review those policies so that maybe they can serve as best practices. So we're not beginning from the ground floor. And maybe it's as simple as just instituting um, those policies. Because, when I hear that in Cobb, there's 0 animals currently held, Clayton, 14 animals, and, DeKalb County, it's, to be honest, based upon numbers that I had previously been given, when we hear 60, for us, that's been progress. But that isn't good progress. That's still far too many that we have. So I look forward to, and one of the things that I've found too in DeKalb, we have a lot of attorneys that are on retainer, a total of 23. I think full time, our law department operates with a total of 8. But one thing that I found is that there was no attorney that, in my opinion, specialized in or had an extreme amount of knowledge beyond what was requested at the time. And it required research on best practices and animal practices. So I will say that, once given the opportunity, I may choose to retain by contract, not as a full time employee, but an individual who has specialized knowledge that can help us along with the legislation as it relates to the review of surrounding counties so that we can determine best practices, and for the drafting of that to also work alongside the courts to ensure that we are moving these cases along smoothly. Because I think, most folks here may be aware that, DeKalb County has, some pretty serious backlogs. And depending on who you talk with on any given day, there is a backlog. There isn't a backlog. There isn't. And from what I'm seeing, though, there certainly are some issues with getting these cases through the courts. And because, of the severity of this, I do want to make sure we have best practices. So thanks for giving the numbers, because again, I've never been given numbers from surrounding counties to determine whether or not what DeKalb is experiencing with holding animals as live evidence is normal or not, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, thank you. And then our final topic, since we're drawing near the end here, the CEO is a very powerful position and holds significant ability to execute plans, as you know. Do you consider the state of animal welfare in DeKalb to be in crisis? Why or why not? And in what circumstances would you expect to implement quick solutions under a year to address urgent issues? Now, I want to back up and say that you did address a lot of that in your preface to our conversation. So don't feel like you have to repeat everything you said, but perhaps you can sum it up for us.
Okay. You are correct. When it comes to CEO form of government, DeKalb is the only CEO form of government out of 159 counties. I'm one of the newer people to DeKalb. And in speaking with individuals, I'm told that there were a few reasons why we became a CEO form of government, but at the time, most focused around one man, and that was Manuel Maloof, and delivering him the power that he needed because he was well liked. And that being said, I do consider, and there's nothing that has changed my opinion, although I had to exit DeKalb County's building and I don't have access to the reports that I did on a weekly or monthly basis because many of you know, I've not been there since March 10th after qualifying for the CEO's race. But everything that I've seen indicated at that time that we were facing a crisis. And there is nothing that would lead me to believe that anything has changed because we still have the same policies. Although myself and Commissioner Long Spears have authored a backyard breeding ordinance. These are things that continue because they have not been adopted by the Board of Commissioners at this time as formal legislation and adopted into our policy. And we still continue to face the issues of overcrowding as well as euthanizing animals, unless something's changed that I'm unaware of, due to the severity of the overcrowding when our shelter was founded on the commitment of being a no-kill shelter. So for me, it remains urgent. And I would say that upon taking office, I'm a pretty expeditious person. Um, I would like to have formal engagement, I would say within 30 days of the Animal Services Advisory Board. First order of business will be to ensure that it is fully staffed, that all appointments are made, and that each district has their representative as well as any representatives from the CEO's office that are necessary for appointments. thereafter to take a comprehensive look at what's ahead of us, which includes, first of all, clearly defining the problem through that external audit that should take place. And thereafter, I think that's when the real hard work begins, because I look forward to using the audit as the basis for the solutions, not making decisions before we have all information in hand. I would assume that an audit should not take more than 60 to 90 days, but then again, that's just me speaking, an assumption. But I just can't understand why it would, because this understanding it has to be a comprehensive audit, but also today, and I take good notes. I notice here, Andrea, that you said including both code enforcement as well as animal control in that audit, so that we're able to have a comprehensive review of everything that's supposed to be working together that becomes a part of the solution. Once we have that information and we can determine what we need to do to expand the shelter to meet the needs, whether or not, even for me, as I've said, I want to really explore providing, I think it's unheard of. Uh, but I did find another jurisdiction that does provide 100% free animal services. So literally, those veterinarians and that staff would literally be on the payroll of DeKalb County. But I do think it's highly possible, not committing, but wanting to do that research. And once we have gotten the data in hand, I would hope that shouldn't be more than 6 months max. I would think the next 6 months should be about implementing and moving forward with a solid course of plan, putting out an RFP for the actions that are going to be necessary to remediate the conditions. And of course, within that RFP, having firm guidelines so that we can finally and honestly be accountable to the community. Because as it relates to animal services, there's so much concern out there. And that pretty much, gives you a timeline. I would say when we say under a year, I do believe that under a year, we should know the course of action and we should have engaged the right people. But the very first thing for me, because I do not believe that anything will be done as it relates to any form of audit before January of 2025. I just don't see that happening because DeKalb is inherently slow, and I just don't see that happening.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Your sense of urgency is clear. It's certainly what advocates for DeKalb animals and the advisory board have been looking for. And I know that both organizations stand ready to help our next CEO. And with that, I'll say that for anybody listening in, early voting started yesterday, June 10th, and runs through Friday, June 14th. Election day is June 18th, and you can visit Advocates for DeKalb Animals Runoff to get a recording of this. It will be a YouTube link that you can check on to get the full recording. And Commissioner Cochran Johnson, thank you so much. I know you have a busy schedule, and we appreciate you taking the time with us.
No, thank you all for having me. A lot of what I deal with is not a science. We have no blueprint, but we're keenly aware of the issues, and I'm committed to taking the necessary actions and being expeditious. And one thing that I'd like to add, because this is something that I think has hindered DeKalb in many ways, is that we do not have a project manager. So oftentimes when issues arise, they have sat pretty much with our chief operations officer, and they sit until we say, well, it's been 6 months, it's been a year. Where are we? But I do plan to employ within the office of the CEO a full-time project manager who will literally sit there and understand all of the charges and responsibilities that are out there. And they will be responsible to work with the individuals that are charged with moving those items along so that we can finally do things in a far more expeditious way than we have. So thank you all so much for the conversation. And I do look forward to being an agent of change and getting some things done.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.